Okay, so it looks like it is the top of the hour. So we're going to kick off the final Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel user group meetup for the year, and we're going to be welcoming Scott in a bit to it officially. But before we do that, I'm just going to run through our standard slide decking and whatnot here to thank our sponsors, of course. Skillwave, the division of Excel Guru, and as our training company where we focus on Excel and Power BI and all kinds of good things to make sure that you are more efficient in your work. And of course, Monkey Tools, my software product that helps you build better data models faster in Excel and audit Power BI models as well. Our 2023 meetups will be coming up. We have not finalized the schedule for those, so we don't have any meetup titles to release at this point to let you know who's coming. But stay tuned on the meetup group, and as soon as we actually have them all scheduled and ready to go, we will definitely let you know. As always, all of our meetups are recorded. Just remember, you got to give me about 48 hours to get them processed and posted up on the Skillwave YouTube channel. And as soon as we do, I will post in the meetup channel to let everybody know that those videos are live. That is the home for all of the YouTube all of the YouTube hosted content from the Power BI meetup for VanPUG here. So those will be coming up in future. Don't forget, if you're interested in some bite-sized learning here, I've got my approximately 3-minute videos that I release every single week. Today's episode that went out this morning was unpivoting error values in Power Query, following along with a little bit of sort of unpivot theme that we have going on here. So if you're interested in some bite-sized learning products, this is a great place to go and get some for free. You can find that on the Skillwave YouTube channel at skw or skw-t.com/monkeyshorts. Just as a quick note, if you are interested in picking up some of our learning products, Black Friday is coming up. We are having a Black Friday sale, of course, like everybody out there does. So if you're interested in learning what that is and finding all the details, you should definitely sign up for the Skillwave newsletter. And at that point, you will be in the know when that actually drops. So keep that in mind as well. Finally, the last thing that I'm going to say before I hand over to Joseph is if you are interested in being one of our speakers at one of our upcoming meetups in the new year, we would love to hear from you. So just fill out the little contact form here and we'll get in contact with you and get you on our stage. And that is all I got for this time around, Joseph. 3 minutes and I'm done. That's unusually fast.
The quickest ever.
Yeah, are you ready? Have you got through all the updates that just dropped 2 minutes ago?
Oh, don't say that.
No, I'm just kidding. I haven't even looked. Right? So, anyway, my friend, the floor is yours. I'll turn it over to you, and let's talk about what's new in Power BI.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ken. I am sharing. All right, cool. Yeah, welcome everyone to the last. I think this is the last one of the year. Is that right? I don't want to say that, and then it's not. I think it's
that is right. You've got next month off. It's all good.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Last one of the year, 2022 has flown by. And as usual, although not last month, I'm here to present the What's New in Power BI. So just a little bit about me before we get started. My name is Joseph Yeates. I'm the Director of Business Intelligence and Data Analysis at Corporate Finance Institute. But outside of working with data and doing all that sorts of cool stuff in Power BI and Excel, I also have a blog that's up here, and my website is feathersanalytics.com. And hosted on here is some of the presentations outside of just the What's New in Power BI that I've done for the Vancouver Power BI Meetup Group and a few other events as well. And hopefully I will also get a chance to speak next year in 2023 as well with some presentation I haven't thought of yet, but that will be cool.
Yeah, we'll make sure that happens. Do you want to go in January?
Oh my goodness.
I'm just kidding. Just keep going.
I took the January spot last year. I think that's good for another 5 years or so for January. Yeah, so with that, and yeah, thanks again, Ken. We will jump into what's new in Power BI, not for this month, unfortunately, because we haven't seen the November release yet. But I know that Ken did go over, well, we went over twice, apparently, what's new in Power BI for October for the feature release last month. And I'm just going to go back and I'm going to pick out a few of my favorites from last month as well. So as always, I'm not going to be able to get through all of the new features for this month's release. There's just too many of them. but we can see all of the new functionality, whether it's new in preview or generally available on this blog on the Microsoft website. So every month there's a blog and usually an accompanying video that goes over some of the new features from the monthly release. Yeah, typically they're grouped into these different sections of reporting, analytics, modeling, and so on and so forth. And so I'm just going to pick out a few of my favorite to go over in Power BI. And the first one is a reporting feature, and it's the reverse stack order for stacked column charts. So if I go into my Power BI report here, I'm just going to take a look at this stacked column chart in the top right-hand corner of the report. So right now we have, as I said, stacked column chart. We have just date on the axis. We have a total balance measure on our y-axis here. And then we have a legend of segment name. So we can see segment 2, 3, and 4, and all of the different columns in our chart are broken up by this. So where the reverse stack order comes into play is that right now we can see we have segment 2, 3, and 4. But then when we compare the legend, particularly if it's to the left of our visual like it is here, it's in the reverse, or it doesn't match the order of the stacked columns in the visual. Like segment 4 is actually on the top here, segment 3 is in the middle, and segment 2 is on the bottom. So it's looking like the reverse of when we compare our legend here to the order that the colors appear on the column chart. And that's not a huge deal when you have like 3 colors, but if you have a little bit more, it can just be confusing going back and forth if you're having to reference, like what really am I looking at here? So what we're able to do now is if I go into the Format tab in this Visualizations pane on the right-hand side, under Legend, no, under the columns, under this color section here for the columns, we have this option to toggle on or off reverse stack order. So if I toggle that on, all it does is it just flips those colors in reverse order. And what's nice is that now when we look at the legend on the left-hand side to our visual, it matches. And really, this is just nice that can make the user experience a little bit less friction for our users, and we can just sort of, our eyes go straight across segment 2, 3, and 4, just like that. My second favorite update from this month is going to be the new quick measure experience. So quick measures have been in Power BI for quite some time. And what this functionality does up until this point is it's allowed us to create certain DAX measures really quickly. So if we want to create like an average per category, for example, some sort of aggregate per category DAX measure, if we need some filtered measure or time intelligence, like if I look over year-over-year change, for example, just with some clicky, draggy, droppy functionality, we're able to add like date values, for example, so I can drag that there, some sort of base value. So from our fact table, I can do like total balance. And then when we hit add, once it's worked on it, it adds this DAX measure into our data model. It adds it somewhere. Here we go. And so if I just zoom in a little bit, we can see in the formula bar that this DAX measure has been created for us, even though it says something has gone wrong. Yeah. Okay. Something has really gone wrong. Okay. So we have, total balance year over year. And we can see that this has just been created for us automatically based on these values that have been inputted. And I really hope I can exit out of this somehow, because it's going to be really annoying. I might just have to. Oh my goodness. Can we report this issue? Go away. Okay. Oh my goodness. Is this a known bug, or is this just a me problem?
I'm not sure, but it's kind of amusing. I don't think I've ever got into a loop quite that bad with Power BI yet. So might be time to shoot it and try again.
Yeah, I think I might have to do that. Okay, let's. What's the best thing to do?
Task Manager is your friend, man.
Yeah, yeah, that's
That's
what I'm thinking as well.
unfortunately. Fernando says it might be the mighty WebView 2 at play. Could be. I know there's been some
It
issues
could be.
around that. Yeah.
All right, let me
So,
kill Power BI Desktop.
yeah, let's say it isn't a good day until you've at least crashed your software once, right? I mean, that's
That is true.
the hallmark of knowing that you're doing a good job with what you're doing. So
Is it me or is it Teams? That's always the fun.
oh well, yeah. I mean, by default, you blame Teams. I mean, that's the first thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. All right. Well, the report's opening back up. So that is the exceptionally flawless experience of quick measures in Power BI Desktop. Let's get rid of this. What's new in Power BI? Alrighty. Okay, cool. And we are back. Ish. We don't need no recovered files. All right. Okay, so with quick measures, we have all that functionality that we've had up until this point of sort of drag dropping, creating DAX measures for our report. And what's new now is that we have this suggestions area. And so this works, how this works is that we can use natural language querying essentially to describe a DAX measure that we want to create, and then that measure will be created for us. So this works in a really similar way to like the Q&A visual that I've reviewed a few times for what's new in Power BI, and also the smart narrative visuals. All of these can be found in the insert under the insert tab on the ribbon up here. And what this allows us to do is if we say something like, what is our count of clients with a credit card, for example. So this might be something that we want to add to a visual or just information that we want to know. I'm going to hit generate. In the suggested measures area down here, we get both a preview of the actual value or the output of the DAX measure. And then if I just expand this to show more, we can actually see the DAX language of what that measure would look like. We have a calculate function. We're looking at the count of clients measure from our fact table, and then we're doing a filter where our account product is equal to credit card. So just using natural language querying, we're able to quickly create measures. And if we're not quite sure either the best way to write it in DAX, or even if we don't quite know how to write it in DAX, this might be a good resource that we can use to just either quickly develop measures or find out some different DAX functions that we're not quite familiar with as well. And as I said before, it works in a really similar way to using the Q&A AI visual. So if you're familiar with that and you kind of have gotten used to the quirks of how best to write your natural language querying, I think this is a really cool feature, and really it's just adding this same functionality to another area of Power BI. So for my last, we'll say maybe two more features. They're both similar. They're both in the model view. So just this bottom icon on the left-hand side of the report. One which I'm really happy is that we have a new relationship view in the properties for in the model view. So now we don't need to go and double click and get the pane up and then figure out what's going on. We can just click on the relationship between two tables. We can see the different tables here. We have cycle fact, which is on the many side of the cardinality to our date table. These are the two columns that they're joined on, and we have all the different options. You know, like, is this relationship active? Is it single? We can still have the old functionality of double clicking on a relationship and having this pop up, so we can have just a slightly different way to interact with the relationship with two different tables in our data model. But I just like having this available in the properties menu. And now, really within the last year or 18 months, I would say, more and more it's becoming a nicer user experience in this model view within our Power BI report. And this is definitely one of them as well. In a similar vein to just this nice functionality of relationships, the last feature that I'll look at before handing it back to Ken and Scott is the ability to create a new DAX measure in the model view now. Finally, this is really nice that when we're looking at our data model and all our DAX measures, we can actually create a DAX measure, and we have the formula bar up here within the model view as well. Previously, we'd have to flick back and forth to the report view, or I guess the data view, write our measure, come back to our data model if we wanted to do that. Or now we're going, now we're able to do sort of everything to do with DAX and data model in the same place, which I think is really nice. Not game changing in terms of the tool, but just makes for a better experience when we're developing our reports, and yeah, modeling our data and building out our DAX measures. So with that, and with only one fun Power BI loop, I think that was actually the first of 2022 in the last session of 2022. So it has happened at least once a year. So I'm glad that we were able to finally squeeze it in there. Yeah, ready to pass it back to Ken, and really looking forward to Scott's session. So thank you everyone for tuning in.
Before you go, you can't quite leave yet, because there's a question for you. Fernando says, Joseph, so what you're saying is Power BI Desktop is soon going to be moved to the cloud. Now, I didn't hear you say that, but is that what you're saying?
I don't think that's what I'm saying.
I think it's an interesting interpretation of the presentation for sure, but interesting.
Yes.
So hey, just for grins on this one, this is interesting because last month, of course, I looked after the what's new in Power BI because you weren't here, and we did not talk about what we actually covered in this. So we had the same build to work with. So for just for grins and amusement's sake on this, the overlap that we had between our presentation is I didn't show anything with the reversing of column orders or visual stuff there, but the quick measure suggestions, relationship editing, and formula bar support in the model view were all definitely things that I had on my list. We had some good overlap there, and then the other thing that I actually covered off, which you haven't mentioned, is that last month is when the Excel team actually dropped an update to Power Pivot that gave us the ability to use the same Power BI DAX measures in Excel as well. So there's some overlap there. So if people are interested in checking those out, you can always check out the recording of this presentation, and then you can actually get my spin on it from last month's presentation as well, just for a slightly different look. So
totally.
So there you go.
Sorry. I just remember one more thing that I forgot to mention, and you may have covered it last month. But if you don't see, if you've enabled the preview feature of quick measures and it's not working for you in Power BI Desktop, you may need to allow user data to leave geography in your tenant settings. It wasn't working for me. It's in the comments at the bottom of the blog post here for October. This is just a great place to check, really, if you're having any issues with the new release, is just the comments of the blog. You may see sort of known issues or bugs and some solutions to them. So this is something that I had to do to make sure that quick measures were enabled. And if you are the admin of your tenant, yeah, it might just be an easy switch for now.
That's interesting. I did not cover that, and actually that answers a question for me, because one of my tenants, it was working and the other one it wasn't, and I couldn't figure out why. So there you go. Appreciate that. That's fantastic. Awesome. Cool. Well, listen, thanks again for being the lead off and the closer on the Power BI side for the year. I appreciate that, man. And definitely looking forward to having a new build of Power BI when you come back in January to show us what's new there. Maybe we'll even have 2 months to work with. Who knows? So maybe even 3.
Spoiled for choice.
Imagine. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks very much, Joseph. It's Joseph Yeates, everyone, and yeah, we're super happy to have him helping us out with this stuff every single month that we get. This is great. So there you go. And now it is my great pleasure to turn the mic over to Scott Durrow. Scott, actually, for those that you don't know, I can actually stand on my balcony and look and see Scott's house across the water, across the Strait of Georgia from where I am. Now, I'm not sure exactly which is his house. I can just see a few of them over there, but it's amazing. You know, we haven't actually had a chance to hang out much, and yet we're not really geographically that far apart. So the good news is we've got this kind of stuff, so we can talk even when it's foggy and we can't wave at each other. Yeah, which it is today. So, all right, man. I'm gonna quiet down on this one. I'm gonna let you take over here. One question I did want to ask for you though is, as questions come in, would you like me to leave them for you to pick up from the chat? Would you like me to interrupt you as we go along? Interrupt at certain times? What's your preference for how to handle those?
Well, you know what? Let's just have a open conversation, and if anyone wants to chip in and actually ask a question, come off mute or anything like that, let's make this an interactive session. So yeah, I'm happy to answer questions as we go along, and we can kind of explore what everyone wants to hear about, really.
Fantastic. All right, let's do it.
All right, awesome. Thanks ever so much. Yeah, so as Ken said, so my name is Scott Durow, and I am a solution architect working in the Power Platform space. So I've moved from the UK about two and a bit years ago, lived in Oxford, and so now, as Ken said, I live on the Sunshine Coast near Vancouver, and my wife was born here, so hence the connection. But I've been a Microsoft MVP since 2013, and I've kind of grown up with what today is the Power Platform. I mean, before that, I was a developer working in sort of the ASP.NET space, and before that, doing industrial control systems in C++ and things like that. But it's really, I feel really honored to kind of be being invited along to speak at your user group. Power BI actually is something, and actually Excel as well, is something that really is close to my heart as well. And I always see it really as a key part of the Power Platform, but often it's overlooked by a lot of the other people that maybe I interact with. And it's maybe one of those things that's sort of dealt with by specialist people like yourself, and as now we need to bring these two things together. But I think increasingly the Power Platform is seeing Power BI as a real pivot point around data and bringing things together. And Excel, I mean, I just love Excel. I think it's probably literally one of the best applications that have ever been written. And actually that does really rather segue into what I'm going to be talking about, because we have the Power Platform, and obviously Power BI is front and center there, but we have Power FX now actually popping up on these kind of diagrams. And if you've been part of a Microsoft presentation on the Power Platform, you'll have seen this kind of slide. But sometimes if you look closer, there are subtle differences in the way that they are focused and the way that they're arranged. And the fact that Power BI, Power FX is actually at the base there now is, I think, a real fundamental shift. Obviously, Power Pages as well is a new thing that's recently been added. So I'm going to be talking about Power FX and how it plays a part in the Power Platform and how it's actually significant for Microsoft's strategy going forwards. So I'm a big user of Microsoft Dataverse as well. So Dataverse has been something of the way I've grown up accessing data, because Dataverse actually came from a product called Microsoft CRM, and I used Microsoft CRM back on version 1. So what the actual the database engine that was used in Microsoft CRM has sort of evolved into what we see as Microsoft Dataverse. So I mean, what is Power FX? And I think really if you look at Greg Lindhorst on LinkedIn, he's the principal PM architect of Power FX, and he's got a number of different blogs, posts, which do a really great job of describing, what it is. But he talks about it as Excel-like, hence why I was sort of really talking about how I'm actually such a big fan of Excel. And it was originally came from the expression language that was used in Canvas apps or Power Apps, as it was before. So I mean, in terms of the number of people who have used Power Apps, I mean, the people who are here, maybe put in chat if you've used Power Apps already, if you're using Canvas apps, or if you're using Dataverse, or if you're using model-driven apps. You pop that in the chat, so it kind of gives me an idea of who's listening. But Power FX came from this expression language that was developed for Canvas apps. And so hence there is a big overlap with Excel, because when they created Canvas apps, it was one of the goals was to try and make it a familiar formula language. So because so many people use Excel, it's like this thing that is ubiquitous. Everyone uses Excel. There's Excel spreadsheets in use in all organization. I challenge anybody to find an organization that doesn't have an Excel spreadsheet. And so there's such a big overlap. So you can see here all of the green formulas here are literally exactly the same as in Excel as they are in PowerFX. There are some additional functions that are in PowerFX, and indeed there's more and more functions being added to PowerFX, with almost weekly actually. And so this is a very simple little demonstration. At the top we've got an Excel expression, which is just doing a very simple splitting of a word split on this hello world, and on the bottom here we've got a Power App which is doing basically the same thing. And if you look at the formula there, you can see it's doing the same thing. Obviously the casing is slightly different, and there's some very subtle differences in the way which the syntax is laid out, but on the whole it does exactly the same. And so if we were to look at it in a nutshell, there's some real key points that I'd want to draw on. And firstly, the thing is that it's actually used in multiple places. So because Microsoft are putting PowerFX is in that foundational layer of the Power Platform, it's being used both on the client side, so Power Apps, as perhaps people have used it, and looking at the chat here, and people are saying some people have used Canvas apps, some people are just new to it all. There's also an elaboration on the with function. I'll certainly will look into that. Actually, I'll pop in. I'll talk about that actually when I do a demo. So do remind me about that. But yeah, so it can be used in both server and client sides. When it's running in Canvas apps as an app on the client, on a mobile phone maybe, or in a browser or a tablet, but also on the server to have business logics and calculations. But also it can create asynchronous functionality. So one of the challenges when you're writing code to formulas to interact with data is a lot of that data, you're going to make a request and you have to wait for the response to come back before you can carry on to do some further work. And PowerFX in its very nature is asynchronous. And so you don't have to worry about that at all. As far as you're writing the expressions, you could be accessing data on the server, or you could be accessing data locally. It really doesn't matter. It isolates you away from that. It manages the fact that it has to wait for that response. And so with that in mind, that data that you're accessing, either local, it could be in a collection or a variable, or it could be in a database, it could be in SharePoint, or it could be indeed in an Excel spreadsheet, or in Dataverse, in that remote sense. The way in which you interact with it is the same. So the way in which you filter that data, you sort that data, or you update that data is exactly the same. And that is a very important part of the consistency that you get with PowerFX. And it has relational data capabilities built into it. So obviously with Power BI, relational databases, data is real key, as we were just looking at the model builder, having navigating relations. Well, PowerFX has got that built in, so I can access my various different data sources, the tables, using friendly names, and then I can access related data just simply by using dot notation. So I might have account dot contacts, and then I can access a collection of related records, or even a single record. And so when I'm doing that, the other key thing about PowerFX is that it actually only retrieves what it needs when it needs it, because it's very easy. Say, for example, when you create a Power BI model, you obviously specify your queries and you get all that data so it can do all your aggregation. Well, with PowerFX, you don't need to specify what data you want to use. You just simply use the columns, you use the entities, the tables, and then when it runs, it automatically works out that minimum piece of data to retrieve, so that you always have the best performance. And so, you know, that this works with automatically paging through data, automatically getting the smallest query needed to execute that formula. And those formulas are only evaluated when they're needed. So what there is this concept of is this dependency. So if you're using another piece of data, a variable or a collection of data in your formula, that formula will only be reevaluated when those dependencies change. And that's very similar in the sense to an Excel spreadsheet, because we don't have a complete recalculation of the whole Excel spreadsheet when a cell changes. The only calculations that happen are the dependencies, the other formulas that use that cell value. So again, PowerFX and Excel are two peas in a pod in that respect. And just like Excel, again, it's always live. So I can start to create formulas. I can create functionality, and I can see it happening immediately. Now, as a software engineer writing software, when I first saw this was like my mind was blown, because I was so used to writing software where I would have to create the code and then compile it and then run it. And where you've got this environment where you can simply write your formulas and you can create your user interface and you can immediately see the result of that, it really is a game changer. And that's when we talk about low code. I mean, Microsoft really are pushing this notion of low code because it's making it easier to write applications for people who are not necessarily used to the skills that you need to write traditional pro code type styles of functionality. And so just like Excel, it's a functional language. It's using pure functions mostly, so they don't have any side effects. So this allows it to be to evaluate things only when things change. Occasionally, we do have to do more traditional types of sequential processing or performance optimization. And this tends to get described as declarative versus imperative. So I wanted to quickly describe what this means, in that imperative programming and in declarative programming, imperative is kind of more what you would describe as traditional programming. So Fernando is kind of so declarative programming is the name of the game. So yeah, absolutely, Fernando, that's exactly right. PowerFX is primarily a declarative programming language, and what that means is, and there's a very good analogy here, is that if I had a problem with my car and it needed fixing, well, if I was doing imperative programming and I had a friend over, and I would tell them to pick up that particular tool and then go and tighten that nut there, or replace this particular item there, and if something went wrong, then it's my fault, because my friend's fixing my car, but I've actually been telling them what to do step by step. Whereas declarative programming is more, well, my friend is already a good mechanic, and I just ask him over and say, well, or indeed her, can you come and fix my car? And they just do it, and everything works. And if something went wrong, actually, it's their problem, not my own. Well, obviously, everyone needs friends like that. But the key is that we are describing what we want to do rather than how it is being done. And that's why imperative programming is this more traditional route, is where we describe how it has to be done. We have to worry about things like caching. That point I was talking about, where only retrieving the data, the minimum set of data to make sure performance is going to be good. If we had to specifically specify the columns or the various bits of data that we want to retrieve, that's imperative. Whereas declarative is I just simply use those fields in my formulas, and then the platform, the PowerFX, will decide on how best to get that data, and indeed when to get that data. So it does all these performance optimizations to make sure that it's going to work to be performant, and it's going to work on multiple different devices. It's maybe going to work offline, and maybe it's also not. It's only going to do a certain number of requests to the server per minute, so we don't end up causing a complete denial of service on a back end service. So declarative programming is really this next step of it's an evolution of the way in which we're programming, and actually this is no different to the way we've been programming, and the programming has been evolving from ever since programming was first invented, right from back in the day when programming was right down to sort of configuring switches and relays. Then, we've now got a much higher level of abstraction, talking about, we've got some machine code, and we've got assembly language, and we've got, sort of higher level languages that then, like BASIC and C, and moving up these levels of abstraction. So it's really this next level, this next jump, and moving into declarative is I think the key. So we were talking about Power Apps earlier, and Power Apps has really had this split personality in the past, and people were in the chat here were talking about Canvas apps. So Pranam was talking about Canvas apps, and Fernando's using Canvas apps. And model-driven apps. So there has been this, or not so much model-driven apps yet. I mean, there's this split personality. They're both called Power Apps, but there has been this model-driven world and this Canvas app world. And Canvas app was the original formula language. That was where Power Effects came from. Model-driven apps were really used primarily for Dataverse. So, and the reason they're model-driven apps is because you create tables in Dataverse, you create columns, and then you can create your model-driven app on top of that model structure very quickly. So you don't have to program the way in which it accesses your data. You can just simply say, okay, I want to have a view of my account records or my contact records, and in that view I want these columns, and then in my form I want to have these fields, and then I define my security and in terms of which users can access that data, and then the model-driven app just fabricates everything for you. You don't have to specify at that low level, hence it being model driven. Whereas Canvas apps is much more of this sort of blank page. You start from a white screen. Okay, well, what do you want to do? You can just put buttons and text boxes and things like that anywhere you like. Whereas model driven, because it's model driven, had somewhat of a much more consistent, yet sometimes seen as constraining user interface. Every single form had basically the same look and feel. It laid out the various fields in the same way. The way with navigation was the same. But what we're seeing is a convergence of these two app types. So now we've got all of that power of model-driven apps, so the consistency of the user interface, but then where we want to use that flexibility of the Canvas world, we can then put that inside that model-driven app. And what this is then resulting in is a single Power App, effectively, which gives us this best of both worlds. There's a question here. So this has got some little icons here, and we're going to be talking about this PowerFX language. And where we've got traditional languages, there are still some areas in Power Apps that still use traditional languages. So you can see here we've got C#, that is a traditional language, and we've got JS, which stands for JavaScript, which is again a traditional imperative language. And so what we're starting to see is PowerFX gradually replace all of these traditional imperative languages to enable us to raise that level of abstraction and work much more in this declarative way. And then obviously we've got all of the performance gains and the lower total cost of ownership. Now, one of the things that people often worry about is, well, hang on a minute. If you're raising the level of abstraction away from these more traditional programming languages, a lot of people get worried about that. They think, okay, well, you're removing functionality. You're removing the ability for me to control what I need to do this. I need to have a particular button doing this in a very, very specific way. Well, the great thing about the Power Platform is this ability to have code components added in. So if I wanted to have a declarative piece of functionality, I can create a component. And so in this case, we've got maybe a Power App with all the native controls. But what we can do is we can put custom controls inside there, which are written in JavaScript, TypeScript. And so they have all the same functionality as React and Fluent UI, which are these are user interface libraries that are written in JavaScript, which basically the web is just normal web applications use these type of frameworks. And in fact, Power Apps itself uses these frameworks. And so these custom controls are no different to the native controls. But the really important thing is that once I've created that custom control, I publish it and it can be consumed alongside the native controls. Okay, so it's not like suddenly if I go down to declarative programming, I have to stay in declarative programming because that's what's happened in the past. What it enables me to do is I just fix that particular issue using declarative programming, publish my control, and then I can go back to using Power Effects as the glue for everything. And I really feel that this is a significant shift in the way that we're writing software today. So I just want to do a quick demo for you in terms of what that looks like. So if I go and open up a solution, incidentally, this is what if you've never seen a Dataverse solution, this is what it looks like. So we've got lots and lots and lots of different. So Nishant says yes, JavaScript. That's what I was saying. Yeah, JS stands for JavaScript, which is a declarative programming in the same way as C# is, and that's indeed what code components are written in JavaScript. So here we've got a Dataverse solution, which is where Power Apps sits inside. So you can see here we've got a little category here called apps, but we've also got lots and lots of other different things. And this is increasingly this is a solution that allows me to add components from the Power Platform into this solution to allow me to deploy it from one environment to another. Not yet. We can't add in Power BI reports yet, and Power BI models yet, but hopefully that's going to come, so that what we'll have is a single place to put all Power Platform components and elements and manage it all centrally. So if I go into this solution here and I go and create a new app, I'm going to create let's go and create a page here. So a custom page. So remember I was talking about this convergence between model-driven apps and canvas apps. Well, the page is like a primary way of that convergence. So a page is effectively like a canvas app, except for it sits inside a model-driven app. So can we use Python script as a question? No, Python, it can't be used inside the model, inside a canvas app to build components. But indeed, you could have a connector to connect to if I go back to a previous here, so you can see here we've got these connectors here. I could actually have a connector to another service that is written inside Python. So I could have a function that's exposed as a web API, and then I could have a connector to connect to that. So the connectors are super powerful in that respect. And so the connectors are kind of like a server-side component version of what I was just talking about in terms of the Power Apps component. So I am just going to I've got a blank canvas here, and that's what I was saying, is that you start from a blank canvas, which is slightly unnerving somewhat if you're used to a model-driven app. But I'm going to go over to my area here, this data area, and I'm just going to go and add in accounts. And what this is doing, this is adding in the Dataverse accounts table. I can also connect to other resources. So I can connect, I can have flows here to bring in additional data. And I can, yeah, there's many different ways of actually bringing in data, but probably I haven't got enough time to talk about them all. But what I'm also going to do is I'm also going to go and get a code component. And if you remember before, I was saying about the fact that there's this ability to bring in these additional components. And so here's like a code component that I've already created. And I'm just going to pop this on here. And what this code component is doing is giving me a grid, like a grid which is kind of looks very familiar to all the other Office 365 applications. And what I'm also going to do is put a button on here. As you can see here, it's like just very easy to construct your user interface. I'm going to put a text box. I'm going to go and put like a combo box like that. And so, you know, I'm building up really easy to build up a piece of functionality. And if I can name this, so I'm going to say text account name, and I'm going to say make the combo box a industry like that. And then we'll just line this up, and I'm going to make this button here called add. So I can just say add new account like that. Okay. So, and what I want to do is I want to bind this grid to my accounts. And so if I come into the items collection here, you can see we've got a formula bar, and you know that's kind of familiar to Excel. It's a very familiar concept, so I can just bring that down. And what I can start to do here is I can say, okay, I'm going to filter my accounts to say ends with, and that's of course that's a Excel formula. And I'm going to say the account name ends with sample, because I've got some sample data in here like that. And okay, so that's bringing in some data. So I didn't have to worry about the fact that this is connecting to an external database. You can see here that I could put any of my different columns in here. You can see I've got columns for a name, for city. I don't have to worry about defining a query to bring this in. So I'll put like that. And then what I want to do is account like that. The next thing I want to do is I want to define the columns that my data grid is going to display here. So I'm just going to simply put a table. Now, before I was querying the accounts table, and that was remote. And what I'm doing now is I'm creating a local table. So the way in which Power Effects deals with this data is through tables, but that table can exist locally in memory, or it can exist on the server. And so this is a local in memory table. So what I'm saying here is that I'm defining the layout of this grid to have name, telephone, industry code, and the width, etc. And then I just need to give it some. I want to put the industry code into my. There we go. So now what I can do is I should have some. Why do I not have any records coming in here? That's interesting. There we go, because there. So I just changed that. And that was actually a good demonstration. You can see I just changed that immediately, and you got that data coming in immediately. So if I remove, you know, you can see it goes back again, sample, and then the data appears immediately. So everything is live. And this is what I was talking about, this kind of mind blown moment, because I'm so used to writing traditional data programming, and I can now sort by all of this data. And I didn't have to do any of this. Like, this is all just kind of built for me. And I've got a combo box here, and I can say, well, the items of this, I can say, well, the choices of the accounts like that, industry. And so now I'm going to define that I want to display the value of that. And so if I run this now, you can see this now it has all of the values of the industry. Now, because this is a declarative language, it won't go and get all of the choices, all of the different option sets for all the different columns in my account. It's only going to go and get what it needs to when it needs to. And so now I could even do add an additional filter here. So I've got this one. I'd say, well, actually now I'll only go and say where the industry, like this, where the industry equals the combo box industry selected value, like that. And so now what this means is if I run this, I can now say only bring in the accounting, or bring the items with no industry, consulting. So, you know, this again is immediately applying those filters. So Fernando's saying, could a collection be used instead of a table? Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, effectively, a collection and a table are really the same constructs. They're lists of records. It's just that the table function is a way of creating an inline collection. That's effectively what's happening. Is I could actually have a button to create a collection now, but this is it's a really great question, Fernando, because it does highlight the difference between imperative versus declarative programming. Because by doing an inline, if I put in, say, if I go back to my fields here, columns, and have this inline here, I could say, let's have the fact that industry code is sorted. I can also say whether or not this column is visible or not. So there is actually a configuration which, if I go into my filters here, the visible, yeah. So I've got so col vis col. Let's just what I'm trying to do here is make something dynamic, right? So okay, let's do this. So if I put a little checkbox on here, let's say checkbox there, like that, and what I can do is then I can make this checkbox immediately toggle something. So let's go back into this inline collection here, and let's just change the width of this. So I can say if like check toggle checked, like that, let's make this 200. Otherwise, let's make it 400. Okay, so maybe we've got some kind of responsive nature if it's in a mobile. And so what's happening is, and that's actually a bad example, isn't it? Because it's on the end. Let's put it on that one as well. And so if I was going to bind this to a collection that I maybe created in a different place, so you can see there it's immediately evaluating it. What I would have to do is I'd have to have an on-change event, and there is an on-change event. And in that on-change event, I'd have to go and update my collection. And so that's much more imperative, because I'm having to define the order in which these events happen. You know, whereas by using this declarative approach, by just referring to these variables, things happen and automatically get reevaluated when I need them to happen. And so let's just get this add new, and I go to the on select button on here and just say, let's put a little bit of functionality in here. Let's put account name. So what I'm doing here is I'm now saying, when I press this button, because the on select event is like basically on click. It's like a kind of, that's the way, but it's much more generalized. The PowerFX uses on select because it could be actually someone doing a touch, or it could be an accessible way of interacting with it, or pressing return as you're highlighted over it using tabs. So on select is much more accurate than an on click, because it can be invoked by many different ways, not just click. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, using this patch command to say patch the accounts, and I'm using the default of accounts. So this is all the defaults for a record that exists in the accounts table, and then I'm adding on some additional bits of information. So like the name, and the industry that's currently selected. And so if I say that now we've got like this, so VanPUG. So if I click add new, because I've got accounting selected, it's going to now go and create an account called VanPUG, and it's going to have the industry of accounts. And so, all that will just happen on the server. But what you can see here is that PowerFX knows that we've just added something on the server, and it knows that it needs now to refresh this data set. So what this means is that we don't have to worry about all of this imperative things. If I was programming this as traditional languages using JavaScript or C#, I would have had to go and do like a refresh, and I would have to go and re-get some data in case there was some server-side logic that had happened. Well, we don't have to worry about any of that. Also, all of the security features, again, is going to be managed for us. So, you know, we've got functionality that we can query. Do I have data source access? Can I add records? Can I delete records? So I can get all the metadata about the data I'm accessing to be able to do enabling and disabling of controls, etc. So it's hugely powerful. So is PowerFX available with Power BI or Excel in addition to Power Apps? Yeah, I mean, I'll come on to that a little bit in a minute, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the with statement. And so, because that was one of the questions that Fernando asked. No, so there is an imperative kind of way of creating variables. So I could say like create an account name variable, and I could set the variable name to be the name in the text box. And indeed, I could even set this on change of the text box, you know, if I was going to program it that way. And that's more traditional. And then I could sort of use that variable down here in its place. Okay, so that's that would be one approach. We're moving gradually away from a declarative style of programming more to an imperative, but there are sometimes where you want to do optimizations, etc. The with statement is kind of like doing a variable, except for it's sort of creating a throwaway variable. So, and what this enables us to do is to create a variable just for the purposes of running a particular function, a particular evaluation. So I could say account name like that. And so if I had a complicated piece of formula that I wanted to use in multiple different places, maybe I had a calculation here that would calculated the start of the week, the date of the first date of the current week, or something like that I then used in multiple places during a formula. Rather than just creating a variable for it, I could just use the with statement and then refer to that in the enclosed formula. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of insight into that. So if we go back to some of the slides, we went back through here. So what this means is that we've got this collision of these two sides, right? Because we've got people who are building software using code first, imperative. We've now got increasingly people working using tools like Microsoft Teams and the Power Platform, and in this low-code fashion. And so what it's doing is PowerFX is really bringing these sides both together, either because the code-first developers are creating components and publishing them to be used by low-code developers, or indeed code-first developers using PowerFX as well. And so I find that PowerFX is giving us this promise of speeding up development. It creates less code to maintain. The code that you're creating is simpler because it's of this declarative nature, and there's less testing. And actually, in Power Apps itself, there is a test framework that allows you to record different tests, and you can rerun those tests as well. So all of these declarative style languages can kind of be replaced to some extent with PowerFX. And so one of the scenarios that are currently in the inside PowerFX, inside the Power Platform, well, one of them is obviously a standalone Canvas app, and that's still applicable, right? You know, you can create a Canvas app and you can deploy it, and people can use it on their mobile phone or browser or whatever. But you can also embed Canvas apps. Okay, so you can embed a Canvas app in a model-driven app. You can embed, as we looked at, we can embed in Power BI. We can embed it in SharePoint, or indeed we can embed it in anything, because there's the custom embedding option. Obviously, licensing has got to be considered, and so, you know, consult the licensing guide. But it can also be used in Dataverse now. So Dataverse formulas. So this is on the server side. So you can create a Power BI, a Power FX formula that gets evaluated on Dataverse when you retrieve the data. And it's actually, that's happening there. It's been compiled into SQL and run on the SQL Server database that Dataverse is built upon. It's also being used to create commands inside model-driven apps. So when you create a button in a model-driven app, so if I go into this Power app here, and if I go into a Power app that I have, this is a model-driven app, and if I go into this, so this is like a dashboard. This dashboard actually is built inside Power FX. Using a page embedded inside a model-driven app, and so I can select an item here. So if I select one of my upcoming milestones, what this has done is it's dropped away from a Power FX app into a model-driven app. So this is all built using that kind of model-driven, consistent user interface. But then inside that, I can then have other elements that are using Power FX. And so, as I mentioned before, we've got the ability to then have buttons on the top here. So you can see here, we've got this update status. I can change it to be backlog, in progress, done. These buttons here are written using Power FX. Previously, you'd have to use JavaScript to do this kind of stuff. And you would create a button and then you'd have it, make it call JavaScript, whereas now we can do this by calling Power FX. And what this means is there's a lot less code that you need to maintain, and it actually makes that code a lot simpler. So another one is as custom pages, as I mentioned. If we go over to this, if we go into this tab here, what we've got is a custom page here. And you can see here we've got the ability to kind of filter, and I can open up an item. And so what it's doing is it's augmenting that very, very consistent model-driven app, which is super consistent, with a much more tailored user interface, right? You know, because I can then say, well, actually my users spend lots and lots of time in this particular area, so which is where the model-driven consistent user interface really doesn't work for them. I need a much more tailored user interface, and that's what we're doing here. If I was to look at an account record, you'll find that actually, you know, the layout is always going to be very similar in a model-driven app. If I open up a contact, it's exactly the same kind of idea. You've got fields, you've got a command bar across the top. You can't really change this layout other than just simply moving these fields around and adding sections and adding grids. Whereas with those custom pages, it allows me to do a lot more. But we've also got recently the ability to embed it inside Power Virtual Agents, which allows us to create these bots that, you know, you can interact. Like you've all seen these on a web page where it says, you know, how can we help you? And you click on it and you're suddenly talking to a bot. And so you can actually use Power FX inside those bots to kind of do much more complex functionality using all of the richness of the Power FX features, Power FX formulas. And then very recently, there are also cards for Power Apps, which is using Power FX, and very similar to a Canvas app, but it allows you to embed that inside Teams. So you have like a mini app inside a Teams chat or in Teams meeting. And so you can imagine a scenario where you're collaborating with teams and you're using these mini cards as a mechanism to collaborate, to perform particular tasks that people do perform regularly. And then obviously in the future, we're going to start to see Power FX pop up more and more. So you can use it for a load of stuff. Now, actually, just for fun, I recently wrote Lemmings. I don't know if anyone is the similar sort of age as me, they'll remember Lemmings. It was I was spent way too many hours playing this game, but I wrote Lemmings in Power FX. So you can see that actually you can do a lot of functionality that perhaps you may have thought with a low code language you may not be able to do, but you can actually push it to the absolute limits. So I thought, well, quickly, what I'll do is I'll just show you how that commanding works, and then perhaps we could just have some questions and have a discussion. So if I go into my model-driven app designer, because I suspect many people are not that familiar with model-driven apps. They've used Canvas apps before, but we saw the way that the Canvas app designer looked, with dragging and dropping functionality onto that canvas. Well, this is what a model-driven app designer works like. So we've got these pages here, and these pages can be either either a table or they can be pages. So here we've got a dashboard which is built using a Canvas app, but equally we've got account views or forms. And if I was to edit a form here, so if I just say edit this, what that allows me to do is to then pick out all of the various different columns that have been defined for that particular table and drag them onto the form and define some degree of things, like we can change the label and we can move them around in different order, and you can configure subgrids and things like that, but it's certainly not to the same level of flexibility. So you can see here I can insert 1 column tab, 2 column tabs, I can add grids, I can add option sets and checkboxes, etc. But the functionality that we get for that, if I put a checkbox there, is I can only bind it to a table column, right? I'm not binding it to a formula that can do whatever I like. It's only binding to a column that's on the account table that this is a form for. And so that's really the fundamental difference. But what it does mean is that you can very quickly create quite sophisticated user interfaces using model-driven, and then, as I said before, augment it using that Canvas style. But what I'll show you how that works for the command bar editor is if I edit my subgrid here, and actually let's go back and go to the project log item, and I'll edit the command bar for that and edit the subgrid view. And what this does is it opens up a designer for that little command bar across the top. And you can see here, if I select, maybe we've got an update status, and this is a custom drop down that I showed you before. If I open up the formula bar from here, what you can see is we've got a visibility rule, but we've also got a action rule. So you can see here, this is what this is doing, is it's patching all of the selected items in the grid to have a particular backlog status. So you can see that functionality is looking the same. It's using the same formula language as we used inside the Canvas app. So yeah, that hopefully has given you a good kind of overview of all of the, well, certainly some of the places that you can use Power FX currently in the Power Platform, and the versatility of it, really. The future is, and this is actually in the release notes in the preview and the release notes for the upcoming next wave of functionality, is that there is going to be Power FX in Dataverse business rules. And so we don't really have very much information on this, but currently business rules are something that can run on the client or the server, and there's very they're not very flexible. There's very limited rules that you can put there. You've got basic if statements to say, well, if it's this value, then you can disable something or add a validation message. Well, by adding PowerFX into those business rules, suddenly opens up a huge opportunity to create much more complicated business rules. So I'm quite excited about that. So the last thing I wanted to mention is that actually it's open source, and this is what's quite amazing, is you can go to a GitHub repository here and you can look at the C# implementation. JavaScript and SQL implementations, Greg Lindhorst said is going to be available in the future for us to use, but you can use it in your own application. So if you wanted to build, I don't know, your own line of business application or some sort of utility, you could actually embed PowerFX into that to create custom rules, custom expressions that could be used. There's a couple of blogs that you go to. philcole.org has done a really clever integration with PowerFX inside flows and inside Dataverse. Jonas Rapp has got a blog on how he's used PowerFX to do some quite clever sort of templating for data management. So yeah, check those out. But yeah, if you've got any questions, then please do chime in, and let's just have a bit of these last 10 minutes perhaps just have a bit of an open discussion. I can see here there's Rob Gales asking what M365 licensing is required for all this goodness. Well, that's a very good question, Rob. Licensing is one of those things that is there are many different flavors to it. Certainly with the Office, with the M365 licenses, you do get some degree of licensing for Canvas apps, but there are Power App specific licenses that you can get. So there is a per user license. There is also a license that you can get, which gives you much more sort of enterprise level functionality for many different users. You can also do pay-as-you-go licensing. So with an Azure subscription, that's a more recent addition as well. So if you don't know how many people are going to be using your app, you can just link it to your Azure subscription, and then every time someone uses an app, it then kind of bills them for that month. So that may be an option to look into. But there is, so Fernando's got a good link there, pricing. But if you go and search for the Power Platform licensing guide, it's a real riveting read, I can tell you. It's a PDF of a large number of pages, and it will certainly keep you occupied for the whole weekend.
But presumably with the licensing components on this, I mean, there's a licensing for the Power Apps component, but there's also potentially the licensing for the data sources as well, right? I mean, when you look at model-driven apps based on, and I can't remember because they keep changing the terms on it. Used to be the common data model or something like that. There used to be an additional price point that went in for dealing with that. Is that still the case?
So yeah, I mean, Microsoft Dataverse is kind of not a product in the sense that you license on its own. There's not like a Dataverse SKU which you say, right, now can you? It kind of comes with the other things. So you get capacity entitlements basically, and you also get API entitlements. So when you look at the licensing guides, certain various different licensing SKUs will give you a capacity allocation for Microsoft Dataverse. And an API entitlement for Microsoft Dataverse. And so what that means is that you're allowed to make a certain number of calls per user per day in a certain 24-hour period. And so that's the thing to look at, is what entitlements you get for Dataverse. And if you look at the SKUs for all the various different products, they also have that kind of same nature. I'm certainly not a licensing expert, so
nobody wants to be.
Yeah,
that's exactly a nasty place to be. Hey, listen, I see another question here from Fernando, which I think is just an awesome question. And here is, how long does it take a normal human to be able to build something like what you showed today?
You mean the Master Manager app? Well, I mean that's probably as for a single person. I mean that's quite a kind of a large endeavor unless you've been using it for a long time. The creator kit that I showed is probably the single place that allows you to do that kind of style user interface very, very quickly. The creator kit gives you, and it's a free kit which you can just download from the Microsoft. It's actually it's in App Source as well, which is the marketplace, if you like, for Dataverse and Power Apps. And it gives you lots of components like the grid that I showed you, but it also gives you other things like pickers and but really I would say the key thing to understand is that when you're looking at building an app like that, only use custom user interfaces where it really makes sense. Because it's very easy to jump right into a Canvas app and start to kind of lay out your controls and all of your layout of your user interface in that kind of custom way. But what I would say is, in this new world, and if you remember that, if I jump back to that slide that I showed originally, originally where we had this split personality, this new world, which is basically a single Power App, and model-driven app is the sort of the housing for the way you build apps. And model-driven apps work on mobile. There's a player on mobile. You can even shrink wrap them as well. So so what you've got is a very, very quick way of building apps, because you just create your model, you create your tables, your columns, then you can drag your attributes on your columns onto your forms. You define which views, and the rest of the user interface is just built for you. The security is handled for you. You don't have to worry about showing and hiding things based on who has access to stuff. That just simply is handled all for you. The responsivity of it, the fact that it works on a mobile or on a tablet, on a browser, that again is handled for you. So by starting with a model-driven app, gets you sort of like 90% of the way there, and that is super quick. And that's what I love about model-driven apps. And I think that's one of the things that perhaps people don't, when they've not used model-driven apps, they don't realize actually how quickly it is to get to a very complicated app in a short space of time. And then what you do is you say, how far can you get using a model-driven app? And that's where you then start to look at PowerFX with this custom user interface. Obviously, you can still use PowerFX for like the formulas that I was talking about, for calculated columns, for buttons in the command bar that do certain things that where you need specific pieces of functionality, but reserve the canvas way of building, that blank page way of building things, for just where it's really going to make a difference to your users.
So out of curiosity, if I can sort of just go back on this one just a little bit here. Hang on 1 second here. I'm just going to mute somebody. If we've got, like, assuming this crowd here obviously is Excel and Power BI professionals, they understand data, they understand formulas and whatnot, but they've never built an app.
Yeah.
How long do you figure it would take to be able to get into it and start? I mean, are we looking for, hey, you got to learn things for a couple of hours, a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years? Like, how long would it take to build that skill set to be able to go and build not a massive app? Like, we're not talking about like your Lemmings that you built, obviously, but something that would actually go and capture data and do a little bit of reporting on it. I mean, how long would that take, do you think, to learn that skill set to be ready to go?
So there's a Microsoft Learn. There are Microsoft Learn modules on using Dataverse and using model-driven apps, which you could do the vast majority of those in a couple of days, and those would give you the skills necessary to create model-driven apps. There is some other great resources out there. Lisa Crosby actually has just released a course on model-driven apps, building model-driven apps on YouTube. It's like a complete course, just a single video, and it's got chapters and everything. And so again, you can learn a lot of these things and start using them very, very quickly in model-driven apps. PowerFX is a different thing altogether. PowerFX, certainly by having the ability to write Excel formulas, is going to give you a huge sort of bootstrap up. but then actually using it to access data and update data, that is certainly going to be a little bit more of a learning curve. Okay, so my advice would be to anybody would be to start with coming into a model driven app, creating a new solution, going into a table, creating a new table here and giving it a name, then going in and creating some columns, and then going and creating some forms, and then creating some views and adding it to an app. And then that you'll start to see that suddenly you've got a very quick way of creating an application, and then you could start using it on your mobile phone immediately to interact with your data. And then you can start to create dashboards and charts and things like that. Now, I don't know if you've probably seen the Microsoft Dataverse logo in Power BI desktop, right? So it's now very easy to get access to this data. Once it's in Dataverse, you can actually bring it into Power BI, and it's actually accessible through a SQL endpoint. So you can do direct queries against Dataverse using SQL, and then you can even embed Power BI dashboards inside a model-driven app as well. So there's kind of a lot of different skills that really all kind of culminate around that model-driven. So it's impossible to say how long it would take you. It really depends on what you're trying to do. But what I would say is that, by creating a very simple model-driven app, you'll quickly see that actually you've got a vast majority of the tools right there at your fingertips to create fully functional apps with very little work.
I'm just always curious from the learning curve side of it, right?
Yeah.
Because I know that like every time you dive into a new application, new something shiny, it's always like, all right, so how much of my life am I going to throw in here before I can actually get something back out of it I can use in the real world and whatnot? So, and I think a lot of people sort of run into that same kind of question. Hey, a question for me on this one here is I'm a little curious on this because I know that when Power Apps first came out, a lot of this was built around you can build these great apps, you can do this really quickly and do all these wonderful things. And I went, awesome. Now I want to share it with my organization or with my organization, no problem. Now I want to share it with people outside the organization. It's like, ooh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where are we on that story these days?
So yeah, you can certainly share. It uses Azure Active Directory sharing, so guest users. So you can certainly share to guest users, basically using the same way as you would share anything in Azure Active Directory to a guest user. They would need to be licensed by, in their own tenant. So it's not like you can share it to sort of like the general public, right? You would need that any guest user is going to need to be licensed through some mechanism, either by having a license yourself or them having a license in their own tenant. So there's no sort of like public access to model-driven apps or Canvas apps, but on the flip side of that, that's where Power Pages comes in, because Power Pages is the portal side of the house where it allows you to have a model-driven app exposed to the world through standard just web templates. And so you can create a model-driven form or view inside Microsoft Dataverse in a model-driven app, and then you can create a Power Page portal that then uses those same mechanisms, the forms and the views, to then present that data out. And that way, what you do there is you license based on, anonymous users. You would say, okay, I'm going to license based on the number of logins you have or the number of page views you've had, etc.
Gotcha. That makes sense. There you go. Any other questions for anyone that they would like to ask or have asked and haven't had an answer on? Either way, please.
Yes.
Fire away.
Question, Scott. Well, a comment. If you agree that model-driven apps could be used more for administrative purposes, and then Canvas apps for the end user with a more fancy user interface.
I don't think necessarily that is. I don't think necessarily that's a way of a guiding principle. Actually, I think model-driven apps are really the container for Power Apps going forwards. That's what we're seeing. So as we saw, that application that I was just showing, that there is that has a fancy user interface. So if I go to here, if I go to the dashboard, you've got a fancy user interface here, right? And it's responsive as well. So it works on mobile. And so I would say that the reason where you may not use a model-driven app is either you've got perhaps a legacy application that you need to maintain, or perhaps you are accessing something like SharePoint where Dataverse is not involved. You're embedding your Canvas app inside Power BI, or indeed something else as well. Those are the sort of times probably where you would create a standalone Canvas app. In all other respects, I think model-driven apps increasingly are becoming a container, and I think I fully expect model-driven apps, the kind of term model-driven apps, to kind of go away over time, because that's what this convergence we're seeing is, that we're seeing both the best of both worlds in one single Power App.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions at all for Scott before we finish up for the evening here? I don't see anything coming into the chat window, so we've got no questions coming there. If anybody is interested in asking a question, maybe just just unmute and ask, I guess is probably the easiest way to do it. If we get two, then we'll take turns. But I don't see anybody jumping onto the mic either, Scott. So if there are no other questions, I guess we'll go. Oh, there you go. Now you got the URock gifts coming up. There you go. That's the successful stuff, right? So, listen, Scott. Thanks very much for coming and doing this. I really appreciate your perspective on this. This is definitely something that we don't have very much on our channel. Mostly we focus more on Excel and Power BI. So it's nice to get the Power Apps and the Power FX components into this to sort of explore that stack a little bit more. So thanks very much for coming. Appreciate
you're very welcome.
And hopefully we'll get to do this.
I was just going to say, I've got a YouTube channel.
Oh, good.
That QR code actually goes to my YouTube channel. Subscribe to that, because I regularly release videos on sort of, cool stuff that you can do with Power FX and model-driven apps and Canvas apps, and sort of trying to push the boundaries, really. And I've actually got a video on that, Lemmings, on how I built Lemmings as well. So, please do go and check that out.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thanks very much again. Thanks everyone for coming, and stay tuned for the new schedule for sessions that are going to be coming up in 2023. And we will see you all in the new year. So until then, make sure that you have a safe and happy holiday season. If you're going to drink, don't drive, all those kind of standard things there. Let's make sure that we all get to the new year and come back and have fun with all this stuff in the future. All right. Thanks very much, folks.